From the high desert of Boulder, Colorado, a beautiful mutant nexus located a mile above the sea level portion of the Babylon Matrix, nestled just beneath the gorgeous Flatiron Mountains. We're now getting snowed on right now. This is Jonathan Zapp of ZappOracle.com, and this is called Why Trump Won. It is the fifth in a series of videos on mass psychosis on the left and right. And this is November 7th, 2024, which should probably be telling you, giving you some idea how I'm feeling. And that's angry. And the reason why I'm feeling angry is there's some kind of latitude with feelings. And basically there's a choice between anger, sadness, disassociation, and detachment. And so basically, sadness, forgiveness, reflectiveness, that's going to make for a very boring video. It's not even clear if I'd have the energy to get out of bed, let alone make a video. And I'll save the disassociation and detachment for self-medicating purposes later when I need it. So right now, what's available, maybe not the best emotion, but it's kind of how I cope. I have a kind of fiery nature. And so what allows me to get through things is kind of keeping up that fiery thing, which can be dangerous, could lead to a sudden heart attack or something. But I do a lot of cardio and stuff like that to kind of like keep the fire strong without letting it burn me out, though I don't sleep a lot. So we'll hope that continues to work. It kind of goes with the subject because Trump is on that kind of metabolism too. That's why he's called the Orange Goblin. He seemed a bit burnt out by the end of this campaign, understandably, but normally no one can accuse him of being low energy. So there are many reasons why I'm angry. One is that despite my enormous sense of self-importance, it turns out I actually have very little control over world history, which is obviously world history's loss. I did make those 4 videos before the election. Any voter had the opportunity to see those online. A few hundred did, but to little effect. Now I have to put up with, I think it was Tom Friedman who called Trump a brain-eating disease because he kind of devours your attention, and often unproductively. I've got to continue thinking about for at least another 4 years, if not the rest of my life, about this one inferior personality. I guess, however, to find something productive in it, it is an excellent shadow autopsy candidate for the American psyche and for human nature. And so that's kind of the perspective that I am coming from. On the other hand, my mom, who was a clinical psychologist for 44 years, would often say, to know all is to forgive all. And this came from, and she would make this case all the time and talk about, the worst kid, that she was a child psychologist, that she ever had to write up a report on or whatever, that if you understood enough about their background, about how their parents treated them and all of that kind of stuff, and probably have to throw genetics in there, that you would forgive all. And there is some sense to that point of view. If I had German ancestry and was raised by my dad was Fred Trump, training me from the earliest age that you're either a loser or a killer. I'd probably be different. And similarly, if I was raised in a trailer park on Cool Ranch Doritos and Coca-Cola and had meth-addicted parents spouting conspiracy theories to the extent that they talked to me at all, I'd probably have voted for Trump as well. Of course, there are some intelligent Trump supporters I know. But, no doubt they've had demons whispering in their ears or different issues that led them to where they got to. I'm not feeling that forgiving right now. My mom also, her other favorite saying was, the facts are always friendly. And so we'll try and get to some of those facts, but to be fair, the facts are more from the point of view of my opinions. Some of it is based on factuality, but until like the Pew Research Group and so forth, they will eventually go through, analyze every single vote, because those will all become public, not with the names attached, of course, so they'll know exactly in a few months, like the exact demographics. But I don't know. I mean, being this close to ground zero, maybe the impressions are fresher. This is when people are more interested in it, and I think we may know enough. The radar return on this election and the kind of shadow X-ray it provides of the American psyche, I think it is in broad outline already visible. And that's what we will be looking into. So, like many people, I'm really good at predicting things after they happen. So, to be fair, in the last week or so, I thought that Kamala's chances were 70%. I got fooled by this woman in Iowa, Ann Salzer or something, supposed to be, people were talking her up. She had Trump 3 points ahead in ruby red Iowa. It turned out he actually ended up like 13 points. She had Kamala 3 points ahead. It turned out that Trump ended up like 13 or to 16 points ahead in Iowa. But people were talking about, well, she's never wrong. She's like the Nostradamus of Iowa or whatever. So, I mean, wish fulfillment thinking I'm as prone to as anyone else. But to be fair, the Trump campaign thought he was going to lose. There were articles about this, I think, in the Atlantic, with Trump insiders saying that people in the campaign were running for the exits. Trump thought he was going to lose, as he did in 2016. If you look at his face and Kamala's face in the last days of the campaign, he looked like a man who knew he was going to lose. She looked like someone who knew they were going to win. So we were all kind of fooled by this. And I guess we have to stop listening to pollsters because they're too fact-based. And it's the same thing like, with the quants and the numerical folks who didn't see the 2008 to 9 meltdown coming, like Greenspan said. I thought people's self-interest would keep them from doing certain things. Okay? I think people were too rational and thought that self-interest would keep people from voting for Trump again after the things he had just said about using the military and his political opponents, after the things that 4-star Marine General John Kelly just said, warning that he's a fascist, that Milley said he's a fascist to his core, that all these people who worked for him and knew him better than almost any voter warned us about him. His last defense secretary, Mark Esper, his first defense secretary, another 4-star general, Mattis, and so on. But that was not right. Because, first of all, it presumes that people act in their best interest, whereas top economists who have PhDs in mathematical models still talk about animal spirits. And the average voter is uninformed, misinformed, and disinformed. And so facts don't have much to do with it. Nevertheless, I will still stubbornly cling to them, but that's probably why my effect on world history is vanishingly insignificant so far as I can tell. So while my conscious mind... So first of all, up until the last 10, 12 days, I was quite pessimistic. In fact, presciently, so now one of the best timed things I've ever done, I decided a few months ago to arrange to go on a trip to Walt Disney World with a Gen Z friend of mine, starting this Sunday because I knew going to need something to distract myself after this was probably going to happen in this election. And because in Disney World, it's kind of a manic thing. You've got like 5 days to see everything. It's going to be the perfect thing to distract me. And I'm so glad I arranged that. Obviously not everybody can afford a Disney vacation, but that's an example of my personal coping strategy. But right now I'm still home, so I'm going to do this video. And then I'm going to work on trying to detach from the next 4 years of car wreck unfolding before our eyes to some extent. I just never been able to. I tried for 3 or 4 days after Trump shot down that borders bill. I tried to detach from the news because it was just too sickening and stressful. But I've grew up in a highly political household. Everybody there was a news junkie. I am too, so it's tough. So I just kind of lean into it and deal with it with fiery energy, I guess. But definitely, my body seemed to know what was coming because I was reporting this to everybody. I mentioned it in an earlier video, but I have couple of biometric devices, a 4th generation Oura Ring, and then I wear the Apple Watch at night. And both of them were telling me don't even get out of bed, incredible low readiness scores, poor sleep scores. Basically you're almost dead. They're basically sending me messages get your affairs in order, this kind of thing. They were I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they were definitely picking up big physiological stress. Finally, today, I woke up with a good readiness score. Why? Because the wave function has collapsed. There's nothing the dread diminishes when the bad thing has already happened. So even though I said this aloud and maybe even on one of these tapes, that although in my conscious mind I was philosophical and even optimistic, my body wasn't getting that at all. And in the best replicated paranormal experiments that have ever been done, as far as I know, triple blind experiments, basically very simple setup. People would be hooked up to simple biometrics like you'd have on a polygraph test, like galvanic skin response, heart rate, and breathing, and all that kind of stuff. And now they would just have a computer that had a randomizing algorithm or something, choosing from a big database of images, and it would show them a new image every few seconds. And most of those images were pleasant or neutral, puppies, sunsets, but every so often would be a gruesome car accident or something like that. And a very significant percentage, and this experiment has been replicated a few times, something like 35%, would show elevated stress response before in the seconds before an upsetting image, suggesting that at least short-term clairvoyance is a reality, even though we have a hard time explaining it. But like many people, I think I have some of that clairvoyance. I had a very prophetic dream while 9/11 was going on, and I was sound asleep and didn't know anything about it. Or this summer, I was out traveling, totally occupied with other things, and suddenly an obscure memory surfaces vividly in my mind of a kid I knew in the East Village in 1984, explaining to me, after I said that, oh, Bob Newhart, he was trying to explain to me why Bob Newhart was funny, and I just thought he was some lame television comedian like Bob Hope or something. And he explained, no, he's this great deadpan comedian. He was right. He was explaining to me that Bob Newhart actually was funny. I never saw that much Bob Newhart, but what I did was good. And suddenly that memory comes up, and I'm like, what has this got to do with anything? This guy's probably been dead for years. I haven't thought of him, Bob Newhart, in decades or whatever. And then the next day it's announced that he died at 4 years old or something. So this can be an example of this kind of clairvoyance. So I think my body was picking up on even what my conscious mind was not realizing in the last couple weeks. Okay, so Why did Trump win? When they asked, and I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler, that's J.D. Vance's job. But when they asked Jung, see the other videos, how did Hitler manipulate the German psyche? And Jung responded, Hitler didn't manipulate the German psyche. He was the German psyche. Trump is the American psyche. He is the shadow part of the American psyche. And it turns out that's a very big part of anyone's psyche, and especially of a collective psyche. And that's why, like, Biden made some little statement that, yesterday about, like, Kamala has a moral compass and so forth. Yeah, okay. But, moral compasses are like so 2015, okay? People are not into moral compass. They are into someone who can channel their rage, resentment, anger, fear, will to power, and grievance. That's that's the giant lowest common denominator factor that works a lot better than a moral compass in somebody whose every sentence seems like it was focus group tested and scripted, and basically Harris and Walls, had the charisma of, like, a PBS tote bag while drinking room temperature decaf or something like that. They were, they seemed sane. They seemed normal to an extent. And that's why I definitely voted for them, contributed to the campaign. But I felt it was probably doomed, except for those last 2 weeks of false optimism, because of something I wrote in 2016, that the first video called Why Trumpocalypse proves you're living in a simulated matrix, where I pointed out that, there's a saying like nature promotes energy and aggression, or nature rewards energy and aggression. It definitely does. But what it also does in the human part of this matrix is it rewards story intensifying characters. The story intensifying character is the one who gets left on the island. And remember, this is just a little part of that that video, worth watching in itself, now more than ever, since we've got more Trump. This is our first reality show president. Well, when reality shows got started, it was with the modern reality show thing got started with Survivor. And who was the survivor, famously, of the first season? It was a guy, I think his name was Richard Hatch, or I think Hatch was definitely the last name. He was like an ex-military gay guy who was like a bully and a manipulator, and he was like the guy everybody loved to hate. He won because what the showrunners realized is he was the story intensifying character. Like, I don't know how many people care about Luke Skywalker, but where would Star Wars would be nothing if not for Darth Vader, right? I think I need to shut off the radio on my phone here. Hang on one second. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm back. So, story intensifying characters get promoted. And that's why I felt early on, that's when I arranged the Disney trip, that Trump was likely to win, because Biden, the awfully self-named Charlemagne the God said something I found very interesting and relevant to that point of view. He said, Biden doesn't have major character energy. And that's why I wanted Biden out of the race. Like, I think when it comes to, when he's settled and is not under pressure and not in a speedy situation, the higher thinking is still there. That was obvious in the press conference he had after the NATO leaders were there, where that one person described it as a tour de force tour of the world. It was certainly true. I listened to every minute of it. He was able to give extremely complex, nuanced answers about what was going on in different parts of the world. But he presents as incredibly old and feeble and so on. And he wasn't enough of a major, didn't have major character energy. You don't want to pick as your major character for the next 4 years somebody who is 81 and not aging that well. So anyway, then we got Harris. I wanted an open primary. I thought, like, can we get a stronger candidate? But, when it became Harris, I immediately contributed to her campaign because, she was the only choice we had. But I felt depressed at, like, the mediocre feeling coming off of her. But again, this is from that point of view. I'm not talking about policies right now. I'm talking about winning elections. And that's why this video is about why Trump won, not on like who should have won or about policy differences. So basically, Trump is the American psyche, and people don't like their lives. People are aggro, and Trump feels like a raised middle finger. That's how they describe him. That's why Trump, with his raised middle finger, is blazoned on hats and T-shirts and things like that that Trump supporters wear, and therefore, like one older woman explaining why she's voting for Trump said, "He's just like me." Okay. She probably doesn't live in a big tower or with her name on it. But the reason why she feels, and not without reason, that he's just like me is because, he's down and dirty and like talks shit on people and like, doesn't know shit, but like is sure he does, like just like me. Trump is a perfect personification of the American shadow. He is the guy at the end of the bar who thinks he knows everything, which is extremely annoying. People who think they know everything are extremely annoying, especially to those of us who actually do know everything. But he thinks he knows everything and is spouting off about with all kinds of like half-baked conspiracy theories and prejudices and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more of those guys around than there are like, oracle making senior citizen Jewish guys, Jungians studying mass psychosis and that kind of thing. So you don't get elected by appealing to like my one person demographic, or to thoughtful people, because thoughtful people who know facts, which are like so 2015 now, are not enough of a voting bloc to become president. Okay, and that's like why I think the word of the year in the Oxford English Dictionary in 2016 was post-factual. We're in that right now. Now, to be fair, the average person throughout history was not well informed and had crazy opinions and was totally conditioned. And so this is not necessarily something new. It's disappointing. It's particularly disappointing to find it's true in an age when the average person, a kid in Africa, has access to more information than like any president before George W. Bush, basically. But information, as Yuval Noah Harari pointed out in his latest book on AI, don't agree with the guy on lots of things, but having more information is not the same as having more truth. He is right about that. Okay. So people barely knew anything about what was going on in this race. And people who are like me, who are like constantly watching the news and trying to figure things out, it's hard for us to put ourselves in the mind of this kind of person. One of the most common search terms before Election Day was, did Biden drop out of the race? Jimmy Kimmel did it. You can find it on YouTube. Did a thing. He sent somebody around in Manhattan on Wednesday, November 6th, and they're going up to people. not in dismal Seepage, Mississippi, in fucking Manhattan, going up to people who, a lot of them looked, well dressed and stuff, and they'd be like, okay, are you voting today? It's Wednesday, November 7th, election day. Are you voting today? And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. Were there long lines at the polling places near you? Oh, yeah, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then and some of them didn't even know who was running. And this is in Manhattan. So it's, as H.L. Mencken said, though he's a notorious anti-Semite, but this is something very wise, he said, no one ever went broke overestimating the crassness of the American people. Okay? And that is still true, because they elected the king of crassness. Why? And that's why they said, he's just like me. Okay, this is a great relief when people find that there's someone in a leading position like president who's just as down and dirty and prejudiced and irresponsible and impulsive and angry and grievance filled and all that kind of stuff as they are. It's a great relief, right? They don't have to feel, they're not, they don't like coastal elites who have a moral compass and no facts. Okay, because that makes them feel inferior. And hey, you're probably not watching, but guess what? You are inferior. Okay? If you don't know facts, if you're filled with prejudices, you are inferior. That's why what Jung said about the well-educated Germans was that Hitler was the personification of everything inferior in the German people. Every people has an inferior side. And Jung was Swiss German himself and realized he had some of those same inferiorities, like a weak feeling function. Of course, in Jung, it was understandable typological because, like me, he was an intuitive thinking type. And that makes feeling the inferior function. And that's why I'm angry. Why? Because undifferentiated male rage is the go-to feeling for those whose feeling function is not in a differentiated state. It's just the easier, it's just you can put your foot on the gas pedal. You don't have to feel all the sadness and all the more complex emotions that I might feel if I were more of a feeling type right now. And in that mode, I am much more in touch with my feelings than I was when I was younger. I'm not completely out of touch with my feelings, but I don't present as a feeling type, obviously. So, anyway. So we had this guy who's a genius shadow channeler, able to channel everyone's sense of grievance. He is authentic. Okay, that's why I'm able to be friends with like people of all generations, because they sense the authenticity. I'm not repressing what I am saying to be politically correct, obviously. I just grew up in the Bronx at a time where people didn't do that. They were constantly telling ethnic jokes on their own ethnicity, on other people's ethnicities to their face, and we all thought it was funny, and we didn't have all this board committee of like woke censors in our mind. Oh, well, we have to be careful how we say this or that, or not offend this group or that group. I don't care who I offend, okay, for better or worse. I'm just one of those confrontational people. And, but you know what? People sometimes like that because one thing that people can do, we're social mammals. Huge parts of our brain are devoted just to like reading other human beings, right? That's why we have this phenomenon called thin slicing, where people can pick up things about other people in a fraction of a second. And one of the things people can pick up really, really, really quickly and thin slice it is fakeness. Why? Because it's very easy for our social primate brain to recognize incongruence in a person when they're smiling but they don't mean it and all that kind of thing. So Democrats run these carefully scripted, focus group, vetted candidates who are being so careful about everything they say. That's why people like Bernie Sanders, Okay, because he's not like that. He's a Jew from Brooklyn. I'm a Jew from the Bronx. We grew up in a culture that was not carefully scripted like that. Whereas Harris seemed like some kind of like DEI hire. I'm not saying she was, but she seemed like it, and seemed like, a focus group tested, you know, PBS tote bag carrying, that this is the woman of color that is safe and that we can all, get along with, or something like that. And that is makes her the opposite of a shadow channeler. Okay, it makes people have to own their own shadow because she's being so careful to repress hers. So, the average person is aware of this very small sphere of things. My boyfriend, my girlfriend, my haircut, my paycheck. Okay, they don't give a shit about what's going on with foreign affairs for the most part. Okay, unless you're woke and it involves Jews, in which case you are very obsessed with anything that involves Jews doing bad things. Whereas, like the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria with 1 million casualties, well, that's person of color and person of color. Like that's not an appropriate subject for moral outrage. Or Sudan or whatever. These things don't matter. But otherwise, people are completely checked out on foreign policy. In the past, maybe 20, 25 years ago, maybe people were not as bad. They were before World War II with the isolationism and that kind of thing as well. So I've got two godsons in the house who are one is 17, one is 20. They're making noise out there. I forgot to put out a sign that I'm recording a video. So, but hey, that gives us a feeling of like the collective out there. All right. So, okay. But maybe I'm going to just step out for a second and tell them to be quiet a little bit. Okay. Hey, I'm recording a video. I forgot to put it. Sorry, I'm practicing. No, you have no way of knowing. Okay. All right. I was a 17-year-old. Strider is a musical genius. Find his music on any platform. I don't use the word genius lightly. I mean, he makes amazing songs that should be pop hits in 30 minutes. So if anybody's a record producer out there who wants to be rich for the rest of their lives, just look up Strider. That's Strider with a Y, Jones, on any music platform. Every one of those songs you hear from conception to finish took him 30 minutes. Okay, so he was doing some singing and dancing in the living room. So I hate to interrupt his creativity, but anyway, okay. Okay, so they're aware of this extremely small sphere. Now, the renowned British publication, The Economist, is just running a series on like why America is the economic envy of the world. It's true from the macroeconomic and elitist point of view, because, we have, they'll ask Americans, is unemployment the worst it's ever been in 50 years? Like 65% will say yes. Well, actually, it's the lowest it's been in 50 years. But people don't feel it. So remember, we live in as Oliver North told Admiral Poindexter, I think, back in the Iran-Contra days of the 80s, he said, remember, we don't live in an age of reality, but in an age of perception. And so these facts about the economy, that it is the world's envy, that almost post-pandemic, almost every other developed country has much more inflation than we do. But these facts don't matter because these are not factual-based folks. And also, the high stock market doesn't necessarily improve their finances. And overall, middle-class folks, their wages have been going down and their economic power, and they have, few of them can remember as far back to the birth of TikTok even. They don't remember, well, what life was like in the way back in the day when Trump was last president, and they still were living paycheck to paycheck. That's just too far back in the past. That's like history buff stuff. That's like, you know, they know what they feel right now, and they don't feel good. And the pandemic was a huge social hit on people. It like just caused people to deteriorate somehow. And all these other things, the social media algorithms, the screens, all this has caused, I hate to say it, but like a devolution, deterioration in people. I'm very cautious about saying that because something I've long known is that especially older guys always, oh, these kids today don't know, I could show you on an Assyrian clay tablet from like 3000 BC where it was like, the kids today, don't respect the elders. The world is speedily coming to an end. Like, this is something that older people, and the World War II generation, my parents' generation, said this, not my parents, but others about the baby boomers. These long-haired hippies can't get a job. They can't do anything, So older people have always said that, but you know what? 17-year-old Strider out there has said the same thing, about what he's observed, even among the kids in Boulder, which are like some of the smartest kids I've ever seen. You go to a talent show at like the public high school that he goes to in Boulder, and it's like the Bronx High School of Science of the early 70s. These kids are like incredibly talented. But he reports, all kinds of things wrong with them. But here's a completely anecdotal, but we sometimes we inflate statistics, like Mark Twain said, there are, lies, damn lies in statistics, and not all that is true can be measured, and not all that can be measured is true or significant. Anecdotal evidence is supposed to be disreputable. But, the idea that we have, as somebody pointed out, that parachutes are an effective health treatment for people jumping out of airplanes is based purely on anecdotal evidence. We haven't done a double-blind study testing having people jump out of airplanes with and without parachutes to determine how statistically true that is. However, the anecdotal evidence seems strong enough. Well, here's some anecdotal evidence for you. I've been living in Boulder, with a couple of years off for British Columbia and world travels and stuff, but pretty much living in Boulder since 1995, and almost every year on Halloween night, I would walk around the Pearl Street Mall and see all these creative costumes and people dressed up in them. And, it wasn't as creative as like the most amazing thing, which was the Halloween parades we had in the East Village in the lower part of New York and Manhattan in the early to very early mid 80s. But they were great. So this Halloween, I did the same thing. Not only were there relatively few people on the street, everybody had like some kind of weak store-bought costume. There were like nobody had like a creatively made, I did, but nobody had a creative costume on at all. I couldn't believe it in Boulder, Colorado. So I take that one anecdotal observation as like people are just not in good shape right now. And their awareness of the world and of other people has contracted. It was never very good for the average person. And we've got to remember, like when we're judging all this is all based on, what I've observed in the 20th and 21st centuries, that like, if we were hang out with like people who worked on farms or were conscripted into the British Navy in like the 1830s or something, I mean, they were, okay, sorry if this is too soon, if it offends any of these long dead people, but they were almost like talking farm animals. I mean, they like knew nothing. Their minds were just full of like, oh, don't do that. Like, that's bad luck. That they all they knew were like superstitions. Many of them didn't know what was going on in the next village. Okay, we can easily forget how stupid the average person was in the past to give us an especially aggrieved sense of how stupid the average person is now. So they're not necessarily more stupid in the past, but the average person has always been ignorant, not factual, not rational, and so on. But we seem to be in a particularly bad phase based on the context of recent decades. Okay, so to be fair to what's going on in the U.S., incumbents are being voted out of office worldwide since the pandemic. And it's because of personal life deterioration, probably. I'm not in those other countries, post-pandemic. And also another big global factor is immigration. And this has been far more disastrous in Europe. Like Angela Merkel letting in a million Syrian refugees with noble intentions, not realizing what people brought up in that culture might do. And a lot of the information is repressed. I met a young German lawyer a few years ago. He was telling me that you can't even, if somebody is a Muslim and there's a crime, that cannot be mentioned, even if it was a crime motivated by their being a Muslim and was a hate crime. You still was not allowed to even mention that on the news. And so that's why we have a turn toward the right in Germany, a pretty alarming place for that to happen. And even in peaceful Scandinavian countries is because, why? Because liberal ideology was not able to take on something we might not want to be true, which is that various groups are various. Okay, it's going to be very different if 1,000 Syrians move into the housing complex next door to you than if 1,000 Norwegians do. Sorry, but that's a reality. Different groups are different, and they may change over time. And a lot of the immigrants that came to this country, like my grandparents, my father's family, they were basically like a Jewish Godfather family with some Jewish gangsters in there, one of whom almost got whacked by his colleague Mayor Lansky, the most famous of all Jewish gangsters and so forth. But as people are in the country longer, they become more acculturated and are likely to do less bad stuff. But we have to deal with where things are now. And I talk about this in my third video, Mass Psychosis on the Left. My parents believed in a liberal ideology, complete sincerity, and so they allowed me to get zoned into, to further integration, a junior high in the South Bronx where I was taking beatings from Black Nation of Islam kids every day for 2 years. You have to be aware that not all groups are the same, and also that Trump is not altogether wrong when he says if you don't have a border, you don't have a country, because that's what a country is. It's a piece of real estate that human beings decided, often at the point of the sword or with all kinds of genocidal bullshit and racism and whatnot, that these nation states were created, but they are now a reality. And we may need them unless we want unless we want Elon Musk at the head of a world government federation, controlling the whole planet, which could be coming. That we need nation states so far, and therefore we need borders. Okay, because when they look into the beginnings of life, when molecular biologists have looked into the beginning of life, from what I understand, they believe it was when we needed to have lipids first, these fatty membranes, because unless you could create a cell membrane, unless you could separate the contents of potential life metabolism from the outside environment it would just diffuse into, you don't have life. So life begins with a boundary. As Robert Frost said, good fences make good neighbors. You need to have a boundary to be a human being. If I didn't have my boundary called skin, I wouldn't live very long, right? And what I also need, or I wouldn't live long, is an immune system, right? To defend myself from foreign antibodies. If I have an open border and allow any virus or bacteria that wants to set up shop in my body free reign, I am not going to live very long, right? That immune system can be seen as like the Defense Department, the military inside my body. Years ago, when I foolishly worked for the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Society, they had all these noble intentions. And then I found out about how totally screwed up they were about Middle Eastern politics and so forth. There was an older woman there named Betty, and who's spouting off like incredibly unrealistic woke ideology, even though she was in her 70s. And I'm saying, like, so Betty, should the U.S. even have a military? And she said, no, we shouldn't. And I'm like, okay, you grew up in a much better neighborhood than I did, didn't you? Okay. Somebody who grew up in the Bronx like I did understood why we needed police and should not defund them. They may be bullies. They may do awful things that we should work on. But given human nature, at this point in human evolution, we need police. And if you want to have a country that has valuable resources, you need a military and you need borders. Okay, you cannot just let anyone in. So as one person put it, the Democratic Party needs to get past the idea that making any distinction between a citizen and a non-citizen is racist. Okay, that is just not going to work with real world conditions. We need to make that distinction, or essentially, Trump is right. You're not going to have a country anymore. So this is something that people don't have to know too many facts to understand. That if one party is allowing people to just come right across the border, that's something that threatens national security and identity. And that was happening. Finally, they totally late in the game. And they also had another thing that was really, is this guy Mayorkas, who's probably well-intentioned and thoughtful, has that like PBS, he seemed like the host of a children's PBS show or something. And you could just look at this guy, probably very high moral compass, but you could just look at this guy and tell that he was some kind of like liberal bureaucratic weakling who was not the right person to defend borders. And, they had no grounds to try and impeach him and all that, but you could just, a picture tells 1,000 words. You could look at this guy and see like this guy couldn't defend himself, couldn't defend his shopping cart in Costco from other shoppers. Like, this is not the guy to be defending national borders of a country that a lot of people want to come into. Sorry, but appearances and perception matters. And so you need to have people. So if the Democrats really wanted to win, again, you can't afford another focus group tested woke candidate. Okay, what you're going to need is like a 6'4" ex-Navy SEAL guy with tattoos who talks like an insult comic. That's who you're going to need to run to have any chance of winning. Forget the polls. The best poll I've ever seen is the 2006 movie Idiocracy. Who was the president in Idiocracy? Dwayne Elizondo, Mountain Dew Camacho. And he was this big, huge guy with big muscles and that kind of thing. Because if people are getting dumbed down, then they want to see like some big alpha. Preferably a white guy at this point. Maybe the Republicans could probably run a black guy. But unfortunately, I'm a third-generation feminist in my family. I voted for Clinton and Harris. But this country is not evolved enough to elect a woman candidate unless she's like some total kick-ass type, some sort of trash talking alpha female, who can like put everybody in their place. There are such women like that, but who's like just projects like total strength and like totally overpowers. Harris overpowered Trump in the debate. Wasn't good enough, because when she's speaking normally, she to me looked like the superintendent of like a large school district in California or something like that. She did not look like this alpha ready to be president type. And to be fair, given how dangerous the world is, we need a president who's got some kind of streetwise alpha to them, because to deal with people like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and so forth, okay, you can't, that's why people didn't vote for, who is this guy who was, they called him an egghead, who was always ran against Eisenhower. I'll think of his name later. It doesn't matter. Most people would not remember anyway, but he was very intellectual, and like, he was kind of the person that Peter Sellers was mocking, was copying as, the president he played in, the movie about, oh my God, I'm spacing all my names right now. The Stanley Kubrick film about, the bomb and all of that kind of thing, the egghead guy. I'll think of his name later. But that's not going to work. That's not going to get somebody elected. And if you want to advocate for any political position whatsoever, you need to win elections. I wish that the president could be some kind of like, thoughtful, Jungian. I don't want to ever be any part of any political office myself, but I would like it was somebody, maybe I would want Sam Harris to be president or something like that. Not going to happen. Okay, we need to find somebody who is a type, who will appeal to lowest common denominator American voters. If they know something about foreign policy and economics at the same time, or will defer to people in their cabinet who do, that's a big plus, obviously. But this is why we are prone toward a strongman totalitarian setup, is because we have the shadow has grown, and those are the people who are the best shadow channelers. And also we need someone who is a story intensifying character and that people read as authentic. Trump, for all his infinite flaws, you don't look at Trump and be like, this is like a wannabe Trump guy or something. No, he really is himself. He really is congruent. He's as awful on the surface as he is all the way through. And so, like, at least you feel like you're dealing with like an authentic personality and not like some scripted, focus group tested, watered down, committee chosen person. Okay. So let's see. We covered a lot of this. Another thing going on that people on the left, intelligent people on the left, don't like to hear about, but is a major cause of mass psychosis on the left and of Trump's election, is woke folk. Okay, like the campus protesters. Okay, and we tend toward an anti-adromia. We go toward extremes. Absolutely, we needed to recognize trans as a real thing, and we needed to support those people. We didn't even know the word trans, but I had a secretly trans friend in the conservative college I went to in the 70s. And two of my closest friends, one is a Gen Z, one is a millennial, are trans. There are real trans people who were horribly discriminated against and are to this day. However, then when they discover an oppressed group, then they go all the way in the other direction to make them into like gods or something. And where apparently, according to the American Psychiatric Association, if a kid an 11-year-old kid announces they're a different gender, and this is during a time of life when people are very confused and go through phases and stuff, and now that's become a known thing, and there's definitely the social contagion explanation of why the numbers of people finding themselves to be trans have so dramatically increased. It's not just because they're not as oppressed anymore. So the left went crazy in the other direction, and it's not killing society. It's not like something that drastic, but I think there's like maybe 500,000 kids now who think that they're trans. Some of them are, but a lot of them are just picking up on a social contagion craze. Similarly, in Hong Kong, I think it was, there were like no cases of anorexia nervosa until they showed it a documentary about eating disorders in America, and suddenly all these girls came down with anorexia nervosa. These things can be highly contagious. If you're based on woke ideology, if you're going and living in a super woke place, if you're like some straight cisgendered white kid, you are the bottom of the totem pole. Like, you should just be apologizing and shrinking up and like letting other voices being heard and this kind of thing, and not speaking to your betters who are part of one of the higher status victim groups. But the moment you declare you're trans or non-binary or something like that, now you're in an elevated victim class, when you have status. And I'm sorry, but like, I've worked with high school kids for 14 years. This is not a stretch. If there's one thing that adolescents are really well aware of, it's social status and all the social status signals. And now we've sent them this signal that like, here's a way to get social status without doing anything. So a complete disaster that I saw coming, and I was like ready to punch my iPad, this is how I watch news, is that the Harris campaign passively allowed the Trump campaign to spend like $20 to $30 million running 30,000 ads during football games, with this thing about Harris saying, that she supported paying for sex change operations for prisoners. Now, in reality, that policy was enacted during Trump's presidency, and it only happened twice. But that doesn't matter, because those are facts. Facts don't matter. Perceptions matter. The Lincoln Project came out with a 30-second ad that expressed that perfectly. If the Harris campaign, which was very smart in all kinds of other ways, should have immediately, they had more money, they had $1 billion, they should have spent $50 million running that Lincoln campaign ad. They didn't even have to make the ad. It was right there. Okay. It said stuff like, he's for Trump is for he, him, we're for us, is the way it concluded. And it completely turned that ad around and showed that the Trump campaign was lying about that. But they did have Harris on camera. And then when she was interviewed, I think it was the Brett Baier interview, was asked about that. She said, "I will follow the law." No, that was your moment for a sister soldier moment. And to say like, no, I'm against spending taxpayer dollars on sex change operations. Okay, I'm not against people who are 18 or over and, want to have a sex change operation. But right now, if you're like my two trans friends, if they want to have a sex change operation, they don't have health insurance. They couldn't afford it. But a prisoner, somebody who's committed a crime, should have that paid by the government and not pay for actual civilian trans people who are not prisoners. They don't get their sex change operation paid for. So it's just a completely stupid idea. One of these rare things, just like, it's relatively rare to have a biological male competing in sports. When it does happen, everybody freaks out, and it shouldn't happen. Not if they've switched post-puberty, and like, the Olympics and other outfits have set up sensible rules about that. But it's one of these things that when it does happen is something that the collective psychosis on the right can have a field day with. So although woke kids are not as dangerous in the sense that they're not going to take over the government and like start a war with another country or something. However, they are extremely dangerous in that they helped get Trump elected. And I've been saying this all along. Campus protesters whose knowledge of history was very fuzzy before the birth of TikTok. But we're saying things like, we are Gaza, and queers for Gaza, we are not for Gaza, queers for Hamas, and we are Hamas. I've heard them say that. Okay, this is a terrorist outfit that has genocide in their official policy of all Jews anywhere, and who would toss you off the nearest building, okay, brutally repressive to their own women, and they're running around saying things like from the river to the sea, okay, that, who's between the river and the sea? Every Israeli, okay? Your protest is not going to cause every Israeli to take off from between the river and the sea. For one thing, they have 200 nuclear weapons. So just chanting that on a college campus is going to be as effective as like holding your breath till you get a pony. Okay? It's not going to do anything except that it's going to make people who are part of the mass psychosis on the right and other people pissed off at the left, because they think that these people are representative, and they're not even representative on college campuses. Okay? And I've got some, also the Jews aren't going to, and I know they have that some, if you talk to some professor on these campuses, from the river to the sea means we want to have like peace between everybody, and that they'll try and reinterpret it, but that's not what they're thinking. They think that that the Jews in Israel are like European invaders, colonists, who've come in to take over this land, okay? Many of them have probably heard of a holiday called Christmas, okay? I mentioned this in video 3. I'll just go through this really briefly. That was about a Jewish Palestinian boy born in Bethlehem, which is on the West Bank, in a large Jewish community. Okay, you can go to Jerusalem, I have, and touch this giant wall from the Second Temple. Okay, when was that temple built? I think it was 531 BC, before there was 1,300 years before there was Islam. The closest genetic match to Jews are Palestinians. And by the way, my closest living blood relatives are half Palestinian, half Jewish. My sister married Palestinian. He was a Jamal. He was from the West Bank. But he was a Christian Palestinian. He was accused of Islamophobia as much as I am, because he, like me, was physically bullied by Islamic folk throughout his childhood. For me, it was 2 years. So he was more Islamophobic than I am. And if you believe in that word, which is a nonsense word, because a phobia means an irrational fear, and it's not irrational to be afraid of something that's an objective danger. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track here, but these campus protester kids don't know what they're talking about, but are extremely wanting to self-righteously cancel anybody that disagrees with them at all. And a huge difference I've found between, and I'll say it one more time, I've said it again and again, the mass psychosis on the right is far more dangerous than the mass psychosis on the left. However, it's more annoying on the left, and the mass psychosis on the left potentiates the mass psychosis on the right. Therefore, it is dangerous. And if you're a college professor, I have some friends who are, it's extremely dangerous to your occupation and livelihood. Woke kids who are canceling people on Twitter and doing stuff like that piss everybody off. Latinos don't like them. Black people don't like them. Basically, nobody likes them. They barely even like each other. Okay, so here's a message to them. They're probably not listening, because one thing they will not do is listen. When I have friends who are Trump supporters, they have a sense of humor about it. We can argue back and forth and diss each other point of view as strongly as we want, and they don't cancel me. Not so on the left. These are like little church ladies in drag with crosses burning in their eyes, and like they will cancel you the instant you disagree with them, which is just you committed a heresy and you're done. And this pisses everybody off, and this infiltrates, even though the weird shit that they do, is relatively rare. It gets amplified in the news. Again, it's a bigger perception than a reality, but it's still a reality too. And it pisses people off enough to get radicalized toward the right, like the Weinberg brothers, who very smart guys, but I tuned into one of them a few weeks ago on the Joe Rogan show, and I'm like, oh my God, now he's talking about the cheat margin, and he sounds like he's completely drunk the orange Kool-Aid. Like, how did that happen? Well, it's because when he got burned from cancel culture for total bullshit reasons, and now he's becoming polarized toward the mass psychosis on the right. So, and so we have a lot of young intellectuals who are now alt-right, because they just are so annoyed and can't deal with all the complete anti-intellectualism. You needed to have woke ideology, which makes absolutely no sense, because anybody who's thinking is going to see the complete inconsistency of its bullshit, like cultural appropriation. Okay? But only for certain groups. So as a Jew, when there's still only 14 million people, less Jews there's less Jews now than in 1939 because of a Holocaust in living memory. I grew up with the Holocaust survivors, but does that empower me to go up to a black person eating a bagel and slap it out of their hands because of cultural appropriation? That would make a woke person's head explode, right? But but for some groups, if you're wearing a little Egyptian amulet, a friend who's a young Gen Z Uber driver, some woke woman is saying oh, that amulet you're wearing is cultural appropriation. You need to take that off immediately, and this kind of thing. The human species has always been cultural appropriators. I mean, there are just all these things that make no sense and totally piss people off. Like coming up with this ridiculous unisex word Latinx, when Spanish is a gendered language that genders everything. Why wouldn't it gender the genders and come up with Latinos and Latinas? And they like that phrase. They've been using it since forever, and but except that some woke people came along and said that's too gendered. Let's call them all Latinx. Well, nobody except woke folk used that term, and when they heard it, it just pissed them off. Okay, so to those kind of woke people who probably aren't listening, you know what? Maybe your voices don't need to be heard. Okay, why don't you know what you're talking about first and become a lot less annoying, and then maybe your voice could be heard. But right now, your voices don't need to be heard. They make everything worse, and they help to bring us Donald Trump. Okay, and I've been warning about that for a while. Okay, all right. You got an angry white guy here. All right. And you... Another thing is, I liked it when Obama was, so he shouldn't have been scolding black guys about their misogyny. Okay, somebody needs to scold them. Okay? I'm sorry. I worked in the South Bronx during the early years of the crack epidemic for 6 years. Okay, black and Hispanic guys are misogynist. Have you heard of rap music? Okay? They should be called out on that. And better that be by one of their own, but by whoever. And a lot of them voted for Trump because he presents as an alpha male and they don't want a woman. And especially, a lot of black guys were raised by their grandmothers and had too many bossy women in their lives and not enough male role models. So they don't want a woman as their boss. Okay? That's bullshit. It's regrettable. They should be called out for it. But it's a reality. And that's why run another woman candidate, Democratic Party, if you want to lose again, unless they're like this total alpha. And Hillary Clinton was an alpha, but like not in the right kind of way. It's got to be somebody who can be like a real trash talking kind of alpha. On the other hand, the Republicans could have run Nikki Haley and she would have totally won by as big a margin or bigger than Trump probably. I can't stand Nikki Haley. So look at where do we have the death penalty for being gay? African nations and Muslim nations. Okay, so let's get out of the mind frame that because you're a person of color, therefore you're enlightened and will vote for a liberal Democrat. It's not necessarily the case, as people are discovering. Okay. So basically what we found is that if you want to, like Lincoln said, appeal to people's better angels, you're going to lose. As Bill Clinton put it, strong and wrong beats weak and right. Okay? Right now, I would short the better angels market right now. Better angels in people, unfortunately, are in decline. What is going to be effective is appealing to people's shadows. The shadow is really strong. So that's not a great fix. We would have to have somebody who appealed to their shadow on the outside, the 6'4" ex-Navy SEAL with tattoos who talks like an insult comic, but is a liberal Democrat in his heart. If we could find somebody like that, that would be great. But that's the kind of rare combination we would need to be able to win an election at this point. And somebody like Trump just is going to appeal so much more to people's shadow because he's an expert shadow channeler. So let's see. I think I covered going through my notes here to see what I did not get to. Okay. I think we're about ready to wrap this up. So what should we do? Now, a lot of this is covered in video number 4 called The Mutant versus the Mass Psychosis. So you can go there to find out. But let me just share 2 things to conclude this and calm down a little bit. Okay. First of all, I'm not leaving the country. I own a house in Boulder. I can't afford to leave the country. And I don't like to run away from things. I'm a counterphobic person. And that's why I've leaned into this whole thing, even though I knew most of the time that the election was probably not going to go the way I want. The way I deal with stressful things is to lean into them. I got into mountain climbing because I'm afraid of heights and this kind of thing. So I got bullied in the South Bronx, so I went back to the South Bronx, not to pay anybody back, but to protect South Bronx kids as the dean and building security coordinator of an all-boy public high school in the Bronx in the early 80s, the start of the crack epidemic. So I'm not leaving the country. Okay. If it's going to be taken over by fascists, then the whole world is in trouble, and might as well face it here. Also, don't count America out. Why? Because as I point out in my first video, you want to bet on the story intensifying character. America is the most story intensifying nation. A lot of people have gone broke betting against America. 2 years from now, in the next midterm election, when people find out that Trump couldn't fix everything in their lives really quickly, like he keeps saying, we could get a blue wave. When they find out that the clock is already ticking, because he told us that in one phone call before I'm even, inaugurated, I can end the war between Ukraine and Russia. Well, he could if Ukraine were willing to give up and give Putin a win. But he probably won't be able to pull it off. So now he's going to be the incumbent. And, he was much less popular when he was an incumbent and even when people retrospectively, remembering his 4 years, now give him a much higher approval rating than they did at the time. So now everything that goes wrong with the economy or with their personal lives or whatever, now it's going to be, now they've only got the Orange Goblin to blame, especially, since he's going to own the Senate and maybe the House too. We're waiting to find out. But don't bet against America. It's still the high novelty place. It's still very economically powerful. We still have institutions and checks and balances that hopefully some guardrails will hold. And if it was just Trump, he's basically too lazy to be a totalitarian. That takes too much planning. It is constant work. He'd rather play golf at Mar-a-Lago and, as one woman on the Bulwark put it, piss into a microphone. Basically, we gave him a choice between prison and being president, as she pointed out. And he decided, yeah, you know what? I think I'd rather be president. Okay? That was his way of staying out of prison. So now, and it worked for him. Those court cases are all going to completely go away. So he's not organized enough to really be a dictator, and he's old and he's not willing to put in the work. Much more, we have to pray that Trump doesn't die in office, because J.D. Vance is far, far, far more dangerous than Trump. Okay, he's 40 years old. He is got 100 times the IQ of Donald Trump. He's an excellent debater. He's not charismatic to most people because basically with that thin slicing thing, people can look at him for half a second and see that he's a giant douche. Okay, and that's why I thought maybe people thought it might be a disastrous Veep choice because Trump decided to go double douche, but it worked. And whereas Harris, like Clinton, went for somebody who looked like what he was, a high school social studies teacher. I was a high school English teacher, but this guy did not look like he had that alpha president typology. In fact, they did a Saturday night skit because Tim Kaine, Hillary's pick, looked almost identical to physically. They both look like, a safe decaf drinking PBS tote bag carrying guidance counselor or something. They did not seem presidential. But so if you want a power identification, and which is what a lot of people want, and that's why Trump very cleverly said, I will be your retribution. I'll be the one dominating your lives, but your will to power will be fulfilled through identifying with me. That was the same move that Hitler played. You're going to feel power by giving me all your power. So Vance, I know she's too woke for me, but I watch her anyway. But Rachel Maddow did an excellent story. She's is a very fact-checking, creditable journalist who means very well. She did a story about this guy, I can't think of his name, but who Vance has called his biggest political influence, and showed videotape of that guy saying Americans need to get over their dictator phobia. So Vance, who's some kind of incredible chameleon or intellectually flexible, intelligent guy, has somehow got himself immersed in totalitarian ideologies. He is the great danger, far more than Trump. So let's hope that Trump has a pulse for the next 4 years, so we don't get J.D. Vance. Anyway, let me close by this. This is the way to ground yourself and not get in a panic. Your job, or at least this is what I accept. So when I'm saying you, I'm really talking about me, but you can take it on if it works for you. Your job as a person remains exactly the same if there is a zombie apocalypse, or if your greatest dream candidate won and their party won the Senate and the Congress and got 5 new Supreme Court justices. The job is the same, and that is to do the best you can from when you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night. And that's what I plan to do. And world history is not in my control. It's probably not in your individual control either. But folk, give it attention, learn about it, vote right, be informed, but recognize that it's like a careening cyclops, going down the long skull-shadowed, avenues of his story. And where none of us as individuals are going to stop its insane trajectory. So just do the best you can between waking up and bedtime.